All right, we are connected for the Friday edition of the Morning Check-In, and as always, looking forward to sharing my 2 cents on a variety of subject matter. But the more important one is the narrative surrounding this whole economic euphoria that this current administration will like the world to believe that we're in, but that the job numbers are telling us something different. So we're going to talk about that and a couple other things as well. And I want to highlight more of what's happening beyond our borders here in the U.S. in reference to the digital technocratic takeover and how bit by bit the whole World Economic Forum's agenda appears to be in full operation with all this digital excitement taking place in the U.S. and abroad. So we're going to talk about that and a lot more. But anyway, for those who are plugged in, welcome. And looking forward to sharing my 2 cents on a variety of subject matter. For those who are plugged in, whether you're watching on YouTube or BitChute or Rumble or wherever you're watching at, definitely feel free to drop some thoughts, ideas, comments in the chat or in the comment section directly. We'd love to hear what you're keeping your eyes on because there's lots of things that's worth touching on, and I can only cover so much in this short time frame. So the goal is to give you some good news centered around the Word of God to get you spiritually charged, look at some market activity. Then we'll look at the mainstream narratives and try to filter through what's real and what's not, and give a more alternative, contrarian viewpoint on things so that people can basically think outside the box, prepare, and to pretty much position themselves for the days ahead. So that's my objective with this whole live stream here, and so I'm going to do just that. But before we move forward, let's get into some good news. Then we'll get into everything else. And so, as always, want to make sure that everybody's plugged in, and so. For those who are catching me, definitely let me know where you're watching from in the chat. Definitely love to acknowledge you. See you there, Gracie guy, grass guy, looks like. Anyway, okay, so let's just keep it going. So August 1st, first day of the month, it's going to be a good month, good way to end the summer off. We're going to do it referencing his power. And this comes from 2 Corinthians 12:9. And just to accentuate the idea here, I grabbed it from the New Living Translation. And so it says, each time he said, let me zoom in here. My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. Then it goes on to say here, you ever feel like your weaknesses disqualifies you? Like you're too broken to be used by God? Listen to the response given to the Apostle Paul during his hour of need. It says, God said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. It says, even Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane felt the crushing weight of weakness. He said, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Matthew 26:38 says, but he didn't quit. He leaned into the Father's will and power flowed through his surrender. And then Isaiah prophesied where he said, he had no beauty or majesty. He was despised and rejected. And that's in Isaiah 53. It says, yet that's the vessel God used to break sin's power. Why? Because God's strength doesn't shine despite weakness. Instead, it shines through it. And so the kingdom doesn't advance through human strength. It advances through the surrendered vessels. Your weakness isn't what disqualification, it's your qualification for his power to flow through you. And the closing prayer here is, Father, I thank you that your power is perfected in my weaknesses, so let your kingdom come through me in the name of Jesus. Amen. And as always, for those who that word happens to resonate with, feel free to drop an amen in the chat or in the comment section. Let me know what you're feeling, if you're feeling it. Okay, so let's just get into this market activity real quick. And so as a result of these bogus figures that came out, or the truth rather, with the revisions, it looks like gold and silver happens to be in the green this morning. And whenever the markets open up from a sound money standpoint in the green, that's definitely something to pay attention to, just because I think the metals indicate the true story of what's really happening in reference to how people are responding to these narratives that we're being given. And of course, when it's in the green, that means people are probably getting physical. And of course, we look at the stock market. Let's just jump in there real quick. See where the S&P is at real quick. I haven't had a chance to dive in. Let me just look at it and see where we stand as of now. And of course, just not too good, because Jerome Powell came out earlier this week talking about not making any moves because the job sector was showing that it was sustainable. And of course, his whole price metric, his two mandates were just completely just bogus, because clearly, as we're seeing here, the S&P 500, and it's specifically that magnificent 7, it's not doing good right now. But then it's Friday. It's still early. We'll see how things pan out. But once again, these revisions here do not help the cause. Okay, so let's just get into the primary subject matter. Then I'll get into some other things that I believe you will want to hear more about. And so let me just zoom in here so you guys can see what I see here. And let me get my screen together 1 second here. Give me 1 second. Let me move in here so I can see what I see. Okay, so real quick, give it to you straight. It says U.S. labor market adds 73,000 jobs in July, while in May, June reports see larger than normal downward revisions. So once again, as I always say, the metrics that they use to try to convince us that everything is hunky-dory is so bogus and so out of whack that I find it comical. But then again, for market's sake and for just investor sentiment, that's what people tend to believe, so be it. But here we have 73,000 jobs. So you mean to tell me 73,000 jobs out of a population in this country of 340 million registered, not plus or minus, illegals, but 73,000 jobs, and whether that was high or low, that is peanuts compared to what it would really need to be in order to show true economic prosperity for the average American person. But then again, we know how the numbers go. So let's get into it. It says the latest monthly job reports showed the U.S. labor market added fewer jobs than expected, while the unemployment rate moved higher. So we got revision downward, unemployment going up. And we know the unemployment figures are already extremely low. All the figures being given to us is designed to suit the narrative for whatever it is that the establishment, aka the government and the private sector, would need to come together upon just to keep things propped up. So I know it's already fake, but it's just interesting when they're losing control of that. When they lose control of a lie, then what do you do? That's the thing that we're going to find out. It says revisions to prior months' numbers reveal significantly fewer jobs had been added than initially thought. It says the U.S. economy added 73,000 non-farm jobs in July, less than 104,000 expected. So they expected 104,000, but they got 73. So then and there shows either a miscalculation and with their own metrics of formulating these figures, or they completely just up a creek without a paddle altogether. But anyway, so we'll see how this goes. But the revision down with numbers has been a common trend, but the numbers are getting larger. And to think that the economy is doing great, only a person who is completely naive and gullible would believe that. Just look around you. Look at all the kiosks on the major roads in your city, and you see more closures than any time before. And then you have an administration that is out here touting that the economy is great. So let me just jump into that narrative real quick, and then we'll go from there. So let me share with you just some rhetoric. I'll share with you some rhetoric from this administration. This is a video here in reference to some comments made yesterday. That was posted yesterday, and I'm going to just let you hear it.
In the second quarter, we smashed all expectations. They thought it would be maybe a little bit less than 2, and it was 3, a little bit more than 3. Consumer spending is up. Business investment is way up. Domestic manufacturing is way up. Real disposable family income is up, and personal savings are up. Other than that, we're not doing so great. We have the hottest country, and I'll tell you, it's a great. We're having a lot of fun with it. At the same time, we dramatically slashed government spending for the second quarter in a row, down nearly 4%, which people were surprised at. We do a lot of cutting also. The private sector has boomed with nearly 600,000 jobs added, way above expectations, while we have reduced the federal workforce by 70,000 jobs. So these are private jobs that are coming back to our.
Okay, so I can't, actually listen to that continuously. He's reading off a script. So clearly the PR team is doing a good job of trying to paint a narrative. Okay, sure. So here we have just this excerpt here. But what caught my attention was the health ranger. He shared his 2 thoughts on it. And I'm like, okay, this to me does a much better job, because anybody who's paying attention for any length of time, you realize that this is all, smoke and mirrors, but it's entertaining to say the least, because it's becoming harder to hide the lies. But here we have Trump is living in an alternative reality. It says everybody directly sees consumer spending is way down. Retailers are closing by the thousands. Malls are half empty. Commercial real estate is collapsing. Restaurants are shuttering in record numbers. Cruise ships are offering insane discounts. Sales of luxury goods are rapidly declining. Home sales are collapsing. Household debt is sky high. It says, in what universe is Trump living in? And that is just something that, once again, people who watch the alternative media, we know what's really happening. It's the narrative. It's cracking. And so clearly when narratives crack, based upon my experiences, usually events follow. And of course, we're hearing so much activity about Poland right now looking to assist Ukraine in directly attacking Russia. And we know if Poland does that, we know things could go. Okay, so that's just one side of the aisle, or both together, however you want to look at it. And so one thing that caught my attention about this narrative is that the job numbers are becoming obvious, hard to hide. We got a president who's touting one thing, but the reality is completely opposite. And then we have a billionaire figure who I want to touch on next that is literally putting his money where his mouth is based upon the narrative. And this happens to be surrounding Ray Dalio and how Bridgewater, he's literally giving up or calling it quits on his baby of 50 years. And so Ray Dalio has written some books. He's become more outspoken and basically just foretelling of an event that will reshape humanity. And so he has literally sold off his stake in Bridgewater and put it into Bitcoin and gold, about 15%. And so to me, this is a very important signal of where the big players are being positioned or positioning themselves for the days ahead. And so at some point, it's going to be hard to hide the lies. At some point, it will be obvious that things are broken. And because I believe things are already broken, we're in the restructuring phase so that once it's revealed to the masses, the reboot can be successful according to what they are working towards, and has everything to do with the digitization. Just look at all the technocratic takeover over this past week. We got the digital health system. We got the digital partnerships. We got, just all that stuff, just more than I can name. But if you've been watching, you've been in tune with it. And so my point is, Ray is literally getting out of Dodge, he's getting insurance against this catastrophe that he believes is coming. And so he's been preaching this for some time now, just like Peter Schiff. But then again, at some point, you got to be right. And so the timing, nobody knows, but it's better to be positioned too early than too late. And so here we got Ray Dalio sells final Bridgewater stake after predicting debt collapse. Says, while continuing to voice economic warnings, Bridgewater's founder Ray Dalio recently increased recommended allocation to Bitcoin and gold to 15%. And so once again, I remember watching this whole, strategy that's being given in reference to the digital sector, and all the big players talking about, 1%, 2%, 3%. So it's been increasing incrementally in reference to where the billionaire players are looking to position themselves just in Bitcoin. But then the fact Ray Dalio is also touching on gold, which he and I both know, and everybody in mama know, gold is a true insurance plan. Bitcoin and everything else in the digital realm is all speculative, and it's in a direct line where they are steering us. And so it's a twofold play for those who want to play that game. And so we'll see how it all plays out. But just to give you a little bit more here about Ray, I thought this was interesting. It says, Ray Dalio has said goodbye to Bridgewater Associates, a hedge fund giant he founded 50 years ago. It says Dalio sold his last remaining stake in Bridgewater and stepped off his board. The Wall Street reported as of yesterday. It said after Dalio's shares, Bridgewater reportedly issued new shares to the sovereign wealth fund that bought a multi-billion-dollar deal that brought it in almost 20% stake in the company. So the remaining stakes of Ray Dalio's position in his own company, he let go and probably cashed out billions upon billions, of course. And of course, with those funds, so if he has 15% in gold and Bitcoin, however, he's publicly admitting that the other 85% may be either in cash or other equities or other assets, more preferably the hard ones, whether it be property, land, whatever it is, he's allocated towards. But in his estimates, I believe he thinks based upon what he's publicly telling us, that's all I can go upon, that having 15% exposure in Bitcoin or gold is worth the risk and the reward if the other 85% of his portfolio underperforms, or his cash pile of that is completely debased. And so the price appreciation in Bitcoin and gold for him is more than enough to allow him to have some type of protection based upon the way he's positioned. That's how I read that. So it doesn't take much gold or Bitcoin in order to protect and to possibly receive additional price appreciation once the monetary spigot cuts on and everything else is debased. And so that's just something that it appears that he may be using as a portfolio strategy. And so a couple other things here, and I'll get into some other things, but it says here, just highlight more of how Ray Dalio has been really vocal about the likelihood of there being a systemic event because the debt is unsustainable. And what is he referring to? Clearly, this thing here that never stops, can't stop, can't go backwards. And so he's basically talking about the day of reckoning where this number exposes the global scheme behind sovereign debt bankruptcies. Okay. So real quick here, it says here, just, this is just a little screen capture, but it says right now, the basic picture has not changed. If the U.S. doesn't cut the deficit to 3% of the GDP and soon, we risk facing an economic heart attack in the next 3 years. And so this is him speaking on earlier this week, looks like on a Fox Business Alert. And so basically say when a country is overloaded with debt, the preferred path is to lower interest rates and devalue the currency. So it is worth betting that this is exactly what will happen. So literally you have the president of the United States bashing the current Federal Reserve chairman, telling him to cut 3 points at a minimum, and each point that he does not cut costs the government $365 billion in interest payments per year. And so literally by cutting rates, the way that Donald Trump is forcing Jerome Powell to cut rates signals an outright quasi default, because we can't pay in high interest rate environments. So the only thing they can do is cut to borrow cheaper to begin servicing the interest on the debt load, never touching principal. And just the fact that the United States government is even floating the idea of giving rebate checks. I'm talking about rebate checks just based upon the fact that Donald Trump has received any type of remittance payments or payments from the tariffs, lets us know that common sense will say pay off the debt if that was the intention. Use whatever extra you get to take on the debt load. But when the debt is beyond payable in the first place, it ain't no point even talking about paying off the debt. So what better way to distract the people and to make people feel good than to talk about giving stimmy checks? And so it won't happen. But then again, between now and the time something breaks, if the system is restructured the way they want it to, with the whole stablecoin implementation and all the other things that are soon to come, they'll be giving out something for sure, because people will be in such desperate situations where they'll be willing to accept anything. So, okay, but I'll move on from Ray, because Ray is obviously telling us that things are not looking good and it's going to only probably get worse. And then so someone says, can we trust buying gold and silver? We can trust buying gold and silver as far as we can depend upon the idea that the federal government, along with our privately held monetary banking cartel, will do what they've always done: borrow and then print. Because ultimately, it's this the medium here that is the greatest liability that we will ever partake of. So as long as more of these in paper or in digital form are brought into existence, every single unit will be accounted for, and it usually is accounted in reference to the price appreciation of real tangible commodities or wealth that cannot be printed out of thin air. So literally, an ounce of gold, an ounce of silver will only be revalued upward in relation to the amount of units that are trying to get into that particular item. And so just look at the Weimar Republic situation. An ounce of gold after they basically went on a hyperinflationary collapse there, every single unit that they created was simply reallocated into metals to where the price, fiat price of an ounce of gold was beyond affordable for anybody to go buy. But people who had a unit, 1 ounce, 1 gram, whatever, had the potential purchasing power for whatever they wanted in society. And so based upon history, those type of events happen every 100 or so years in every single country on this planet. So I wouldn't necessarily think that gold and silver wouldn't do it this time. The question is, what type of world will we be in if we get to that type of environment? Because I don't think having gold and silver will protect or save you from the calamity that will unfold around us if we get to points where there's pockets of unrest and uncertainty and everything else. Because the average Joe and Jane don't hold anything physical. The average person, outside of people watching here, don't own anything. So if you don't own anything, you have nothing to lose. So therefore, you're going to be the first person out to go try to get something. Therefore, this won't be a pretty world if it gets to that point. And that's what they're trying to prevent, because they want to make sure they have options to give people some crumbs to keep them from basically figuring out who's the reason for this, which happens to be the Eccles building in DC. And then, of course, the other so-called representative of the people and our politicians in DC as well. So they don't want to take the blame. So believe me, they're going to have some solutions for people. And of course, we know it has everything to do with the digital nature that's being rolled out. Okay, so that's just a little long-winded answer to that question there. Okay, so what else we got going on here? In reference to this digital takeover, if you just look at the last 7 months or so of Donald Trump's administration, the increased speed at which the U.S. government, in particular, Donald Trump and his advisors, have collaborated with and partnered with the tech sector. And there's no better example of that than this past week of them announcing the digital health system, where they partner with a large amount of publicly traded companies, software companies in particular, social media, tech companies from a variety of sectors, to transfer personal health records, store them, keep them, give you a QR code so you can scan it. Doesn't that sound like a something straight out of the World Economic Forum's great, Klaus Schwab's Great Reset book type of environment? And so while we're being told to look over here, and Donald Trump's trying to read these PR forums telling us how great things are, over here and underneath the surface, they're building out the perfect surveillance state. And so here's just some recent news that you may or may not heard about. Just happened this morning. It says U.S. Army pulls contracts up to $10 billion Palantir deal. So Palantir, Peter Thiel's company, is being positioned as the number one gatekeeping software for all our government data, because they were in feud with Elon Musk, Doge department. I talked about that a couple weeks ago. Then you have Palantir being a part of the health system that I just referred to. I'll show you an article on that. Now you have Palantir being used with the U.S. Army. And you just think about this. Palantir has more pull than any other company, it seems, when it comes to creating this perfect digital surveillance state. That should be concerning, because once again, I'm not sure how any of this makes America great again. America was great when we had a smaller government. None of this digital stuff existed then, and the people's voice mattered. I don't think people would have voted for this had they known where all this has headed within the last 7 months. And I can go on and on and on, but I'm not, because after a while it kind of gets tiring to talk about this when I've been basically talking about this for too long now. But just to give an idea here, it says U.S. Army on Thursday said it would consolidate dozens of contracts into a single enterprise deal. So you got dozens of contracts with Palantir, or perhaps some contracts they're taking away from other companies, and they're putting it all into the hands of Palantir. It says, given it volume-based discounts and the option to purchase up to $10 billion from software providers over 10 years. So once again, that should be something that people should be concerned about. But, once again, it's hard for people to like look out and foresee what's being set up without them panicking and, not or losing hope. That's the biggest thing. It's not ideal to think about things that you can't control because you run the risk of losing hope, and we don't want that. Okay, so keeping it going real quick here. Let me get in a couple other things here. Here is something that is not present in the Western Hemisphere, but like always, it's tried and perfected in the second and third world environments. And so here we have Somalia makes national ID mandatory for banking. So Somalia, country in Africa, nobody really talks about, nobody cares about from the Western world because it's not on our news sources here. But they are being given mandatory IDs by their central bank. And mind you, every single central bank on the planet all works under the World Bank and the banking cabal in general. And so, Federal Reserve being the biggest and the last to have any of this type of stuff adopted, every small bank, especially third world, second world nations, will have it first. So it's better to see what's happening there so you can get an idea of what they would like to do here. It says transactions from September 1st. So here's just a little quick rundown. And it's good to say you will not see this from any other alternative media people unless they go international. It says a new rule will go into effect in Somalia, mandating citizens wishing to open a new bank account or update an old one to present a national ID issued by the National Identification and Registration Authority, so NIRA. And it's good to say, I can't verify this, but this National Digital ID by NIRA, I would assume, without even knowing, let's just find out. I would imagine that NIRA is probably let me just find this out real quick. It says National Identification is a government-owned organization in Uganda. Okay. It says founded in 2015. And it's good to say some of their partners, if we can get any of that information, will definitely have coffers in other parts of the world and other governments. So don't see anything else here, but believe me, this National Identification Authority is not a African-only entity. Okay, so it's good to say they're taking orders from somebody. And so once again, if I did my research prior to this, I can probably backtrack and show you exactly where it originated from. And believe me, it wasn't from the African people. Okay, so, but once again, just this type of stuff that just, you won't hear on your CBS, Fox News, whatever. But as of September 1st, in order to have banking access, you got to have a digital ID, which means you got to be in a different server outside of your government. So this NIRA clearly is not a government, it's probably government authorized, but it's not a government entity. This is a private entity. And this is just my estimates as to how NIRA and all the other partners this will all play out. NIRA as a company, whatever they are, it's a private public relationship between the government of Somalia and the central bank to capture people's information outside of the regulatory framework so that it'll all be linked up to a national database within the continent of Africa. So every single country in Africa will have a central bank ID issue, whatever, which will then be the gateway for you getting in and getting out. And then that's just step one, because step two will come the actual linkage to your health, to your finances, to your social side of things, to all the other things, to where the goal is literally put a brand on you, but a digital version. That's what this is all about. We already have that now. It's called a social security number, but they're taking that old outdated format, updating it, putting it onto private company servers, i.e. all the digitization in every single country, and then putting it to your personal profile where it'll be accessible to a central control source that will literally probably be somewhere in the European region, and every country, all 175 countries, will ultimately be responsible for putting every single human being on this planet's information to a computer and a file system so they can track, trace, and see in real time you and know everything about you. Heading towards that social structure needed for them to pull off the idea of a one world governance model, which will be down the line. So everything is adding up towards the restructuring of humanity based upon the orchestrators' desire to consolidate all power, all finances, all health, all identity, all everything into a smaller, centrally controlled unit where people have no freedom, no choice, and will be physical, mental, emotional slaves, but they can't control your soul directly. Thank God. Long-winded ass. Okay, it doesn't stop there. Here's something else in reference to banking, central banks. Here we have OpenAI CEO Sam Altman pitches the eyeball scanning World ID to bankers. So we all know that the World ID concept came about from Sam Altman. Let me just eyeball scanning. So for those who might be new and never know, the World ID was a project. They turned into a blockchain-based project. It has a little oracle ball where you scan your eye to prove that you are who you are. And so it just gives you an idea here. So it says Sam Altman's World ID, a biometric identity verification system using irises, scans has officially launched in the United States with 6 locations in major cities. So it's literally already here now. It's called the Iris Code, is what it says. The system operated through the spherical device called Orbs, scans user irises to generate a iris code and creates a World ID. Okay, so here is a young lady right here looking into an orb. So you look into an orb. And it scans your it scans your eye and helps them see that you are who you say you are, as if you need proof. They need proof of who you are so that they can collect all your information and put it into your personal digital profile. Okay. And so here it just gives more information as to how Sam Altman, his idea hasn't taken mainstream because people have been pushing back, but he's pitching it to the banking cartel, so it's something they can use. So we have Somalia with digital IDs. Here we got Sam Altman, which also is the head of OpenAI, in which our government has decided to partner with them in every single thing now. And so what is the likelihood that this World ID, iris scanning ID scheme doesn't somehow, some way make its way into the United States, where as a part of the requirement to participate in the digital health system that's been announced, you got to scan your eye and scan your QR code all at the same time. Who knows? I could be completely off, but then again, Grass guy said, "Oh, you lost hope. Don't lose hope, my friend. The goal is to not put your hope in anything tangible in this realm, because it's all temporary. So if you know everything is temporary, including you and me, then why would you hope in anything that you know is only here for a short period of time? That's why it's important to have something much greater than ourselves, and that's where faith comes into aspect. That's all you have, is your idea of having a belief that you believe in your core of something greater than yourself. Because if not, then what are we here for, literally? And that's why I believe that there's more to this entire story that is yet to come, and that requires faith. So that's why I start off with the good news, giving people something to get excited about, because ultimately mankind's greatest problem is government, and we see that this government structure is failing the people in droves because of the enemy. There's an enemy. Once you know that there's an enemy this against humanity, you have to say that if there's an enemy, there has to be something good somewhere and in someone or something. And it's a matter of coming to your version of truth. And of course, the Bible is the best way of distinguishing between the good and the evil. And if you believe in that, then just look at how the story ends. It ends favorably for those that are within the good side of things, which happens to be quite clear cut and precise, the individual known as Yeshua. Some people call him Jesus, some people call him Jesus. You can call him whatever you want to call him, but the son of the one true God, Elohim. So I can go on and on and on, but you guys get my drift there. But just to end this off real quick, let me see. I got a couple more things here. Let me just, for the sake of, for those who want more deep diving and things of that nature, then I want to send you to the RTD.news page. And so for those who want an alternative perspective on a variety of subject matter, there's more. I just can't cover it all in this video. But if you go to RTD.news, links in the description, it'll take you to this page here, and you can just read until you just can't no more. And so here's just some of the headlines here. This might be worth your while. And so here we got Powell holds the line, economic prism. We got no improvement in the Fed's preferred measure of inflation for 8 months. We got the Fed's favorite measure of price inflation rises again. We got U.S. home listings are rising across the states. We got projected highs at the Fed is now full swing. We got Trump administration firing of federal workers expanded. We got the modern state. We got debasement. We got Trump's liberation. So we got all types of narratives and stories that will definitely keep you glued in. And to me, these types of resources are far more valuable than watching Fox, CNN, or anything like that. So that's just something to consider. But anyway, for those who have enjoyed this breakdown of a variety of subject matter, trying to all pinpoint and center it right onto where it matters most, which is ultimately your faith, your hope, your expectations, and what you can actually do and control within your own scope, which is your action, your words out your mouth, and how you bless and help other people. Outside of that, everything else is already taken care of. You know what I'm saying? Things have to unfold. It won't be pretty, but if you in the winner, you're going to be good in the end. Anyway, be blessed, be safe, love, live, laugh, learn. If you enjoyed it, hit that thumbs up, drop a comment down below. Let me hear your thoughts. Take this, share it, and give people an alternative perspective. Because believe me, you won't hear this anywhere else from this level of spiritual, scientific analysis and everything else. You just, I think it's unique. But anyway, shalom.